Well, hello. Gustavo Armaño is going to present his thesis work, master thesis work, in the role of HCI in the construction of disability. I think that your presentation will be 30, 40, 45 minutes. 45 minutes to 1 hour. To 1 hour. Okay, then we will start to do some questions. Of the members, jury, and then I don't know. I think that you can start now. Okay, great. So, well, I appreciate you all being here. I really thank you for being here, and I appreciate having Emmanuel Guillermo, Juan Pablo Urcade, and Eduardo Fernandez. I'm really honored to have you here, guys. And also, I'm honored to find that I have some surprises here. I have Javier Couto here, and I'm glad that he's here with us. So let's get started with the main motivation here. And it's that there's a common agreement that you can't really understand how complex carrying out a project involving HCI and disability without really putting your hands into it and experiencing it by yourself. So I carried out a 2-year HCI research project consisting in basically developing user interfaces for children with cerebral palsy. I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to talk about what cerebral palsy is. And the project was called Nexo. And it basically brought together HCI researchers, software engineers, cognitive psychologists, and teachers for the main purpose of addressing access barriers of computers distributed by a one laptop per child program in Uruguay. The project helped me not only to gain experience on the field, but also reflect about the way HCI deals with disability. It taught me why we, as technology researchers and practitioners, should always be aware that neutrality is never neutral. So, a little bit of background here. Uruguay is part of the One Laptop Per Child program through the Plan Ceibal. That's the instance of the program here in Uruguay. And it's aimed at promoting digital inclusion and reducing digital divide. And the plan or the strategy of the plan is to give one laptop to each student attending public education centers in the whole territory. And in 2001, Plan Ceibal fully deployed computers to all public schools in Uruguay. So between 2009 and 2010, I defined, led, and carried out, along with a team of software engineering students, an observational study in a school called School 2000. You're going to hear about School 2000 a lot in this presentation, called Dr. Ricardo Caritat, which is a public school in Uruguay. And the reason why we focus on that school is because that school is one of a kind. So basically, it follows the national educational program for children with typical development, right? But it only accepts children with cerebral palsy, spina bifida, among other motor-related pathologies. And there are no other public schools in Uruguay of this kind. So whereas officially School 2000 is a regular school, it was conceived to partially or fully rehabilitate children with physical disabilities pursuing social inclusion, right? And being a regular school, it received laptop computers from the One Laptop Per Child program as any other school in Uruguay. However, as the observational study that we carried out observed and concluded, these computers are not accessible to most of the children attending the school, right? So 50%, we found that 50% of the school children don't use the XO at all, and most of them were even broken. And the reason is that there are several factors undermining the accessibility of the computers. So one of them is the small screen size. They have a small screen size, small keyboard, and even the first version of the XO had a faulty keyboard. Then it ships with a lot of software applications for children, right? But they are not very sweet for children with physical disabilities and vision problems, like perception problems and all that. For example, the letters, this is one of the most popular ones. It's called Tax Paint. And the letters are in lowercase. There are too many options. There are low contrast between foreground and background. The symbols are very difficult to understand. And the design is like cluttered with a lot of UI components. And the School 2000 has a very limited budget. And in order to kind of compensate this lack of accessibilities, basically the teachers by themselves have to build their own gadgets and devices. So they would use like keypads to, for building push buttons, and among other really house-made strategies. So some words about cerebral palsy. So it's very complicated to define the term because it's an umbrella term, and only recently, like medical doctors and all that, like come to an agreement of what it is. But it's basically an umbrella term. To put it simple, some disturbance happens in the brain of the baby, right, causing permanent motor disorders. It could be the baby or the fetus or any child below 5 years old. This basically leads to consequences, future consequences, like problems in sensation, perception, cognition, communication, and behavior. Right? They develop over time these conditions because children basically there's a theory behind this, but basically there are early development stages that all children need to go through, and if they don't go through these stages early in their life, then they will miss the possibility of developing these cognitive areas or other psychological development areas. Right? So there was an opportunity here, and this is part of the conclusion of this previous study, which was that if we could find a new interaction mechanism bypassing the mouse, keyboard, and screen paradigm, then we might be able to first allow children diagnosed with motor dysfunction to use the XO, and second, turn the XO into a tool for rehabilitation, empowerment, and social inclusion. There was even a second study carried out by an independent team, which included sociologists and psychologists that came up to the same conclusion as ours. And then we found out that we were working on the same field, and we came up with the same observations. So we go to the HCI literature on the topic, and we find something called perceptual user interfaces. That, according to the literature, they are promising interaction modalities for enabling accessibility. So basically, PUIs, PUIs or perceptual user interface, they integrate multiple perceptual interaction modalities, such as computer vision, speech, and sound processing, haptic input-output, into one user interface. So they don't use a keyboard, they don't use a screen, or maybe they use them combined, but they also integrate other perception channels. So the first, it was important to answer the feasibility question. So basically, the XO is limited in terms of CPU and memory, and also there's another issue or another factor that it's that in terms of software engineering and programming, accessing certain internal software components in the XO, it's also constrained by the restrictions imposed by the Plan-Saival security policy, right? So it is possible to turn the XO into a perceptual listening interface despite all of its technical restrictions. So that was the question. So the observational study I just mentioned, it quickly turned out into a feasibility study aimed to explore if it was technically feasible to build a perceptual user interface or PUI and some simple games on top of it. And I'm going to show you a video to show you how it works. Let me show you on this part. So basically, the user interacts with the XO by showing printed shapes to the camera, like this. And when the XO recognizes the pictures, then it triggers an action. So you can build games or you right? The good thing is that these shapes could be printed in like paper and placed in different supports. Like for example, it could be placed in frames made of wood or plastic, or wrapped in hard plastic shields, taking advantage of the kind of supports that are normally used at School 2000 for didactical purposes. So now that we knew it was feasible, we wanted to move forward with the goal of exploring the use of technology in unconventional ways. So we started with Nexo, which is the project I was talking about. And Nexo brought together researchers and students from many disciplines, including human-computer interaction, software engineering, cognitive psychology, and also education. And Nexo was directed by me and co-directed by Anna Martin, who is a cognitive psychologist specialized in cognitive science. In cognitive disorders. And the question was, could the XO be used in combination with PUI as a tool to improve cognitive development? That was our first question. So about the expectation about the target population. So let's say that if we distribute the school population, the school children of School 2000, along two axes, with the y-axis representing the range of motor disorders from low to severe, and the x-axis representing accessible zone here, which here would be distributed the children that was already able to use the XO because they have like from mild to low cognitive disorders and from mild to low motor disorders. So they would be here, and here you would find like that 50% of children that were already using the XO. Then you will have an unreachable zone, which are the children with from, I would say, more than mild to severe cognitive disorders, and severe, well, from low to severe motor disorders. Actually, you won't find this area in the school because children tend to be tend to have like from mild to severe motor disorders. But basically here, if children cannot understand because of their cognitive impairment, if they could not understand directions, or if they could not understand what a user interface is, or like integrate different concepts, then it would be almost impossible for them to make DxO accessible, regardless of the technology that you can build on top of it to kind of break the barrier. So then we would find an inaccessible zone that we really wanted to put our hands on, right? And those were the children who had from mild to severe motor disorders, and from mild to low to mild, let's say, cognitive disorders. And this is the area or the cluster that we want, because we wanted to kind of first, or at least at first, like give them the opportunity to use DxO as a tool to promote cognitive development. And we have two challenges here. The first challenge was that we wanted to test if PUI would be beneficial for in the inaccessible zone, and the other one was to test whether DxO would be used as a tool, could be used, sorry, as a tool to promote cognitive development. So in order to test the first one, we needed to do two things. The first, we needed activities and applications that engage children into using PUI, and another challenge was we needed to modify PUI software and turn it into an app that could be integrated like nicely with other apps, other existing apps in DxO. And in order to test the second one, so to verify if we could use it as a tool for cognitive development, we needed to design and execute cognitive stimulation treatment using PUI, and also we needed to test if subjects under treatment improve their cognitive functions compared to a control group. So we wanted to basically use psychometric tests to measure first if like what was the population before the treatment, then execute the treatment, and afterwards see if using the same psychometric tests their cognitive levels were increased or not. So we knew that we didn't know much about the target population. So we decided to run a pilot study and engaged into an action research approach. Action research basically helps establish a test, learn, adapt cycle where experimenters are allowed to formulate new hypotheses as they learn more about the context, to review the process, and ultimately, and most importantly, to readapt their actions to better serve the end beneficiaries. So to put it simple, basically, traditional research is like you first formulate hypotheses, and then you try to kind of deny those hypotheses. And with action research, you don't know anything about the context that you're working on, and you need to learn a lot about it before formulating the hypothesis. So you would plan, study and plan, then you take action with the little knowledge that you have, and then you collect and analyze evidence, and then you reflect. You go back to a lab, and you have debriefing sessions, and you think about it, you contrast what you learned with literature and new things that come up from those discussions, and then you start all over again. You adapt your process and you start all over again. And start, study and plan, take action, and so forth, so on and so forth. So action research was an extremely useful instrument for driving Nexo's research process over a global long-term perspective. So I'm going to talk about next of stage 1. So we defined several goals and objectives belonging to software engineering, cognitive clinical psychologies, and human-computer interactions. So software engineering's goals were related with using PUI to improve the accessibility of the XO. And the cognitive and clinical psychology goals were related with carrying on the cognitive stimulation treatment using PUI. So in order to achieve like objectives 3 and 4, were designing and executing a cognitive stimulation treatment using PUI and analyzing the validity of this treatment, we needed to first have these goals achieved, the software engineering goals achieved, right? These goals, 3 and 4, were planned and carried out by the team of psychologists. They involved designing a battery of cognitive stimulation activities using the software products resulting from the first goals. They were, along with the goal of improving accessibility, the driving forces guiding the product discovery process. And then we had the human-computer interaction goals, where, I separated these, but they are all like intertwined. And the first one was to articulate an interdisciplinary team, then design and execute the product discovery process, design and execute an accessibility evaluation process, analyze the accessibility level of PUI and the educative apps, those are the EDAPs, and also carry out an action research project. That was basically my task. All of it. So to prove its validity, the cognitive stimulation treatment, I'm not going into details about this because this actually belongs to the field of cognitive psychology, but it's important to mention that they needed children actually up front. They needed children in the inaccessible zone. They just needed to test if the combination of the XO, PUI, and the stimulation activities improved cognitive development. So they needed to test that. So for the pilot study, the cognitive psychologist, in agreement with the school director and the teachers, selected a subset of the population, most of them with low to mild cognitive disorders, because these guys needed to understand directions, and mild motor disorders, because they wanted to test if the treatment was valid, and they didn't want accessibility to be a major obstacle at this point. So, as I mentioned, they evaluated the children using a set of psychometric tests, filtering out those who had severe cognitive disorder. And they ended up with a group of 24 children, representing 25% of the school population within that particular segment that was selected. And in terms of the subjects for like the product discovery, involving like developing the applications and UI and all that, due to schedule restrictions and to prevent any conflicts with the school, basically the children were attending the school, and we didn't want to interfere with the regular schedule. We used the same population to base design decisions on, right? And I also relied on the cognitive psychologists as like the subject matter experts, so the guys who really knew about how children with cerebral palsy behaves and what are the limitations, to base early design decisions on, in a way to compensate the lack of subjects in the inaccessibility space. And here, this was the development process. So we started from here, basing our problems on the knowledge that we already have about the context. That was prior knowledge about these two studies, or observational studies that I mentioned before. So the context, we were like taking for granted that we were, working in a school, and that was School 2000 with all of its characteristics and its complexity and all that. And we were like basing our approach in what is called the individualistic medical model of disability, which basically like interprets disability as a lack or a dysfunction in the body, basically. So so that approach basically thinks that like disability is a sort of mark in the body, and in order to overcome that problem, you need to kind of fix or compensate that mark in the body. And of course, with the cognitive psychologists, we incorporated cognitive theory in our like theoretical work frame, and we defined the problem, which was lack of accessibility of XO laptops prevents from using it as a tool for cognitive improvement. And then we use a myriad of methods and methodologies to end up with the results, including Agile as a software development process, then using the cognitive psychologists as subject matter expert. We use the school staff as the clients, so we perceive that they were the clients, and we also use the school staff and the children as users. And we ended up with results which were a new PUI and a series of educational apps based on PUI. And we kind of, below that, we had this action research, test, learn, and adapt cycle that I mentioned before. So we ended up with different products. One was Mousecam, which was basically, it helped turn you could use printed shapes to move like the mouse in the XO operating system environment, and also like pressing keystrokes without using like the keyboard. Also, an interactive storytelling game involving like the user would have to this was like what was the name, like choose your own adventure, right? And that there's a story, and at some point the story stops and asks you questions, and you need to answer a question in order to choose a branch of the plot. Then other games. One was tic-tac-toe, and another was rock, paper, scissors, using the XO and PUI. And finally, a battery of activities using Turtle Art, which is Logo, basically, for the cognitive stimulation. So we analyzed all disorders and low to mild cognitive disorders. So, and this is the point. Children with mild to severe motor disorders are extremely hard to detect using a standard psychometric evaluation. Think about this. Are they giving the wrong answers because of their motor disorder or because of their cognitive disorder, right? So if you think in this way, like the psychometric test also is a user interface. And as a user interface, it might have accessibility issues, right? So we didn't know if children were not using the psychometric test. We used WIS-4, and we also used Piagetian evaluations. And if the children weren't like able to answer to those questions that we were asking, so basically that begs to the question whether the problem is their cognitive disorder or their motor disorder preventing them from accessing it. So maybe the psychometric tests were throwing false positives to S2, right? Maybe we're like detecting false positives here. And we had to rely, in order to confirm whether that was our perception or not, we had to rely on people with close relationships and who knew them better, the teachers. And they say that there aren't much people in that segment in the school. So was this particular characteristic of school 2000 population, or was this a phenomenon rooted in a more profound problem? So about the second one, it is commonly agreed that approximately 45% of children with cerebral palsy also have an intellectual impairment. But a study that I read like after we ended with Nexo found that intelligence assessment in children with cerebral palsy lack reliability data. Consensus regarding validity data, I mean. So basically, they found that this was a meta-analysis carried out afterwards, and they found out that if you use standard tests for measuring cognitive, the cognitive level of children with cerebral palsy, then you may not be measuring this deficit. So basically, the question at the end of this project was, can we answer to these questions? So one of the main teachings from stage 1. All right, so conclusions. Preliminary results suggest that PUI may prove beneficial to children with mild motor and cognitive disorders in cognitive stimulation treatments. So it can be concluded whether PUI effectively reduces access barriers or not. That was the end of stage 1. It was not possible to carry out a controlled experiment for the same reason. If you don't have if you cannot trust the psychometric test, so then cognitive psychologists acting as subject matter expert may have misled design decisions. So we had these proxies on behalf of the end users, and we ended up with that happened with the interactive storytelling game. We ended up with a game that wasn't suitable, enough for the children. I can talk about that later. And I think that this was because we perceived the children as subjects of study instead of participants in the solution discovery process. So one of the main teachings of stage one was that it was necessary to involve the children in the inception phase of certain educative apps, especially the ones involving narrations, graphics, and animations. And then also empowering users. That was one of the main teachings. So we need to defer the idea of achieving. This was part of the action research conclusions. Defer the idea of achieving a quantitative experimental design for validating these results. Kill the middleman. Get rid of the proxies. And we want to engage the children in the inception phase of some apps. Okay, we wanted, of course, and this is key to understand Nexus stage 2. We wanted to reach the segment of children with severe motor dysfunction and low to mild levels of understanding. So we wanted to figure out if, given the right interaction scheme, some of the children with mild to severe motor disorders who ranked low in the psychometric tests were able to follow directions and engage in activities involving the XO. So let's try different interaction schemas. So maybe there was, so if psychometric tests were lacking accessibility as a user interface, as I explained before, then we may have the chance here to find new user interfaces, allowing us to detect whether there were some children that actually belonged to S3 that were being false positives and to tag as children in S2. What? So again, I think I already said this. Oh, okay, no, this is another thing. So early user involvement, the context as a protagonist, and this is another thing. So we found out that other contextual factors, and this was important for like conceiving or designing or leading the design of the applications that we were going to build in Nexus Stage 2, was that there were other contextual factors, personal and environmental, diminishing motor function and social engagement. Not only cognitive, like for example, if you have children at the school with severe or mild to severe motor disorders in a wheelchair, then she might be able to move around, but she wouldn't do so. And at first, you would think about this as, okay, maybe she's not moving because she's not understanding things, like she's not like interpreting reality as a child in typical development or with mild to low cognitive disorders. But actually, and this is one characteristic of cerebral palsy is that like if they don't feel confident enough, they wouldn't move. So it's important move around. So it's important to also include other environmental factors, right, in order to achieve your goal, which is at the end making them participate in social activities, right? Okay, expand the scope beyond cognitive development. Yes. So Nexus Stage 2. So here, from the software engineering perspective, it was to develop different interaction mechanisms in record time. So we had a very, very, very short time for building all this. And once you develop a new interaction method, you need to engage the children into it. So it was important not only to develop the user interfaces, but we also need to build some applications. I mean, with adults, you can tell them, go sit and use this user interface. That will not work with children, of course. So you need to kind of develop some games or some sort of interactive things to make them engaged into the user interface. So in terms of HCI, and here we have a more like cohesive interaction between the two. How do you call it? Whatever, between both. We need to prepare a catalog of. We prepared a catalog of product ideas. Allow software engineers to freely choose one of them. And that was for, we had little time and we wanted them to engage and to feel the compromise of, building these user interfaces and games. Also, design a participatory design protocol suite for children with cerebral palsy. Third, design a usability test protocol to test the different interaction schemes. And 4, assisting teams during fieldwork. So while the first stage of Nexo focused on the immediate accessibility problems caused by the XO, the second stage expanded the locus of attention to address the classes of problems producing lack of participation. The development process and the roles of the stakeholders were reformulated, shifting the attention towards end users and guiding agents as guiding agents of design decisions. So here we had more idea about the context. We took it, not for granted. We took it like pragmatically as, okay, we are staying up on School 2000. And we followed another model of disability that I will explain later, which is called the biopsychosocial model of disability, which basically perceives disability as a complex interaction between the body and the environment. So we gained experience with that. We ended up with a lot of defining problems, which was difficulties to connect with other people and the environment, as I explained. And then children as users, and solutions were a variety of user interfaces and a number of apps depending on these different interaction mechanisms. So results. The first goal was to build a scheme based on tangible interaction, and the result was an in-house shock-proof version of the MIT's Makey. I don't know if you know about it. Go to Makey. And the implemented device was named MakeUI for Uruguay. This routing, and the idea was to disrupt the conventional ways to access the XO, allowing to easily assemble adaptive keyboards of a wide variety of objects and materials. So one of the main features is that it allows the beneficiaries to build their own keyboards. You can basically turn every object, or almost every object, into a key. Like, for example, we use fruit salad, bananas, apples, and like. The second prototype was creating an interaction scheme based on computer vision to make it possible for the XO to recognize arbitrary objects presented in front of the camera. And the trick to achieve this was to put a QR code in the object. That was 2012, don't blame me. But actually, that was, it was the first time that a QR code was enabled, QR code reading was enabled in the XO. As far as we know, there weren't prior projects using this technique. And the third one was creating an interaction scheme scanning. So the resulting prototype was a game implementing the visual scanning technique, which is like you divide the screen into a grid, and then the mouse or a cursor automatically scans the screen, and the user press a key to stop the mouse where she wants. And we ended up with a lot of games, as you can see, involving a variety of psychological areas of cognitive development, like cognitive development. Not only that, also physical communication and social development, and I can show you videos afterwards if you want. So here we used I used a case study evaluation to assess the degree of penetration of the proposed solution. And MakeUI perform outstandingly well compared to the other interaction schemes. So we use Make UI with Flappy Physics, a one-button game that consists of like stretching out Flappy balloons using the spacebar to make a ball catch the target on the screen, right? So instead of the spacebars, we use bananas or other like objects. We also use Play-Doh and other objects that the children were familiar with. And some of the population in S2 seem to get the idea of how the interaction mechanism and even the game worked. That was like qualitative, right? And that was suggesting that they were able to understand relatively well complex directions. Here. Okay. However, there was one outstanding case. There was a child belonging to a segment S2 who was not able to use the XO before, according to the testimony of the school's personnel and in accordance with the observations. And against all predictions, the child was able to successfully complete the game using Make UI and a banana as a switch. He ended up like sweating, very happy. And at first, like he seemed to hit the switch randomly. And after a period of trials and errors, he started to harmonize with the timing between switch presses and to achieve the goal of like catching the star with the ball. That was really impressive. So conclusions for Nexo Stage 2. Well, we developed 3 unconventional interaction schemes for the XO. One child with severe motor dysfunctions was able to understand directions using the touchable interaction UI to access the XO. Further work needs to be done in order to validate if Make UI can reduce access barriers. So reflect and adapt. So Nexo Stage 1, as I mentioned, was influenced by the individualistic model of disability. It defines disability as a missing function or a structural alteration in the human body, or called impairment. And consequently, professional practice deriving from the individualistic medical model tends to propose solutions that involve bodily interventions, right? So things like this. Hey, let's solve the XO accessibility issues so the children can use it as a tool for improving cognitive function, right? So we were like adding a missing piece. The second stage of Nexo was influenced by the biopsychosocial model of disability, which defines it as a result of a complex interaction between the abilities of the person and the health conditions of individuals and the environment. And professional practice, underpinned by the BPS model, tends to propose solutions that prioritize the reducing access barriers over medical interventions. It contemplates the possibility of intervening in the human body only when health is compromised, and any other possibility has been exhausted. And struggling to find the screen. Sorry. So ideas from based on or professional practice based on the BPS model are like this. Like let's use the XO as a tool for turning the environment into an interaction space that engages the children into moving around, playing, socializing, and participating in social activities. And there's a third way to interpret disability, which is the social model. So basically, it defines disability as social construction resulting from power asymmetries in the Western society. And professional practice grounded on the social model of disability tends to propose solutions based on empowering the excluded. So there are things like, hey, let's use technology to allow stakeholders to overcome contextual restrictions in order to promote true social inclusion. At the end of the journey, action research allowed us to understand that the context itself was a preconceived solution. This was School 2000, aimed to solve a particular problem that worried a group of people in the mid-20th century who tried to solve it using the tools that they had within the worldview of their age. Like, probably, if we had to solve the problem right now, and we had like a budget and all that, we wouldn't build like a one-size-fits-all agency, Montevideo, receiving children with disabilities from all over Montevideo with all the consequences that carries on, including, for example, that, if you have a problem with your child, with the children, a behavioral problem at the school, then the school teachers would want to call the parents and ask them to come to the school, like, as usual. But since the parents are like in a low socioeconomic status, they are not able to travel to the school, and then those opportunities to like improve some part of the children, then they are missed. And also, as part of the analysis, I carried out a survey for this thesis, and it revealed that the biopsychosocial and social models of disability have had little penetration in the HCI scientific literature. Major findings and conclusions. Oh. Oh. All right. So, extremely difficult to put into practice quantitative experimental design based on using psychometric tests to assess children with cerebral palsy, underlying cerebral palsy. We also learned a lot of practical experiences about what to do and what not to do, right? It changed my point of view and also the experimenter's point of view on the phenomenon of disability. We learned that each interpretation of the phenomenon may bias the solution design process. We also learned that action research is great and a great mechanism to give new meanings to preconceived ideas. And also, I believe that the case study, Nexo, may help HCI researchers that one may want to embark on projects of this kind to see the complexity of this. And finally, we end up with this, that it allowed us to understand that scientists and practitioners should know that the concept of disability is a construction. There are many interpretations of disability, and that each intervention deserves a critical analysis about its own discourse. Here are some contributions, some papers that I wrote and with other people as part of this thesis. And that's it. Less than 1 hour.
Well, now following the second stage, questions and comments. I think that.
Sorry, can you hear well? Sort of. So. Yeah. Maybe you can. You can
I think that perhaps it could start Manuel Guitriga, because he was the reviewer of the thesis.
Sure.
And then continue Juan, Pablo, and then with the last question, the easy questions. Sure.
The easy ones. Ready?
So, Emmanuel.
Okay.
You can start.
Yes. So, first, I want to raise my involvement. It was really, and I must say that I was very astonished by the amount of work that you put in this. I don't know if that's usually in Uruguay, but for a master thesis project in France, Master of Research, Master of Science, you would never expect students to put that much effort on the realization of the predominates. To me, that was a major undertaking, and I was very surprised how much you put in this, and it's a great piece of work. So congratulations on that first. And then, of course, I have a bunch of questions for you. So first, just a curiosity, I thought that you were going to do this defense in Spanish, and then you ended up doing it in English. Why is that? I can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah, we can hear you.
There you go.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let me split, yeah.
Inception.
Inception. So why English? That's a very good question. It has I think it has a practical answer. It was because of you.
I you can't use that. I told Javier that I was happy having you do it in Spanish.
So one question about maybe we can turn the ¿Quieres que hable español? Puedo hablar español. Pero habla español. ¿Sí?
Sí, sí.
Perfecto. Bueno, primero que entendemos que hablando en español, y si uno no habla, y hablando en uruguayo concretamente, y si uno no habla, digamos, modulando y despacio, puede ser difícil para alguien que no es nativo en español poder comprender. Nosotros allá, cuando tú fuiste mi advisor, nos comunicamos en inglés, y el inglés de alguna manera se ha convertido en la lengua franca de la ciencia, nos guste o no nos guste. Y una de las razones, también me han cuestionado por qué escribí la tesis en inglés y no la escribí en español. Y creo que una de las razones es que podemos dividir lo que es difusión académica de lo que es prensa científica o difusión de conocimiento popular. Y hoy en día, si uno realmente quiere que un trabajo se difunda académicamente, entre en el círculo académico y en el círculo de investigadores para que se beneficie la comunidad de investigación, entonces está bueno hacerlo en la lengua en que hablamos todos. Si yo hubiese escrito esto en español, por ejemplo, probablemente un equipo en Estados Unidos, si esto sirve para algo, ¿no? Un equipo en Estados Unidos no podría estar accediendo a este conocimiento. Entonces, creo que es algo que tenemos que superar, que es el hecho de que hay un dato de la realidad, y ese dato es que inglés es la lengua franca académica. Luego, hay que hacer un esfuerzo muy grande para, bueno, el conocimiento científico, adaptarlo a cada localidad. Y creo que eso es algo que, sobre todo, yo conozco acá lo que ocurre bueno, en el Instituto de Computación, no es representativo de lo que ocurre en la universidad, pero en otros equipos de investigación realmente luchan contra el inglés y tienen problemas para acceder al inglés, y eso representa como una especie de atraso de conocimiento, ¿no? Vamos atrás de lo que va siendo traducido y no estamos en la cresta de la ola donde deberíamos estar. Entonces, creo que tendríamos que escribir en inglés. La presentación, bueno, yo la estoy grabando, a pesar de mi mal inglés, la estoy grabando en YouTube y quizás alguien lo puede ver. Y capaz que se beneficia más gente hablando en inglés. Bien. Ahora, estoy de acuerdo en que habría que traducirlo al español y traerlo al medio local también.
Okay.
¿Entendiste todo?
No, but I mean, I'm not going to argue about that. You're making me. I mean, the reasons you give are very relevant. It's just in France, there's a tendency to reject English, as the language used for talks, unless there's a actual reason to use it when you will have people in the audience who don't understand it. And some people fundamentally reject the idea that to reach as many people as you would like to, you have to speak in English. They resist this very strongly. So I was wondering what was your stance on this. Okay, was I muted now?
¿Vos me muteás?
No.
¿Vos me podés mutear, por ejemplo?
No.
Capaz que sí.
What? Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, now the scientific questions.
Okay.
So one thing I was wondering is maybe that was in the report, in the dissertation, I don't remember, but how did you specifically screen your participant population for the stage 1 experiment?
To screen the participants?
Yeah. You mentioned that you eventually selected 24 of them.
Mm-hmm.
But so how did this process go for screening them?
Okay, so it was a combination of two things. The first one was so the school director and the teachers, along with the cognitive psychologists, like pre-selected a subgroup of the school population that were most suited for the experiments, and then those were more than 24. Those were 35 children, and then the cognitive psychologists ran these psychometric tests on each child to evaluate their cognitive level. So it was a combination of a qualitative decision based on criteria of the school population, the school teachers, and also these screening, these psychometric tests. And don't forget that this was a pilot study, and we wanted so do baby steps at first, and then over time start for the second stage at that time expand or change the way that we were screening the children.
Okay. I have a related question. So you mentioned that after stage 1, you realized that running controlled studies in this kind of context was extremely difficult. And one question this raises to me is, if you look at this from a purely practical perspective, where you want to have significant results when you run a quantitative experiment, given that for the population you are focusing on, there might be a much higher level of variability in the behavior of your participants, isn't it likely that you would anywhere have a lot of difficulty of reaching statistical significance in the results of your observations?
And the question is?
Well, for me, there are two things. It's the fact that it's difficult to run controlled studies in this context, so that's what you said. But I think that there's also some things that is not controlled compared to a population of, let's say, able-bodied people, is that you will have much more variability potentially. Because you mentioned that cerebral palsy is something that is it's an umbrella term, and that you have many different instantiations of it. So if you take people from school to 100, there will be very different types of disabilities. And so even if you do a screening, you will still have a lot of variability in the populations that you get as participants, right?
That's correct. You see a lot of heterogeneity, variability in the population.
Yes.
The etiology of cerebral palsy is very complex. You have like children with, they cannot move the lower limbs, or they have spastic movements, and also in terms of like perception, like for example, some of them cannot see very well. Some of them are completely blind, and you have like different and very different, and it's very difficult to like. Let's say that I wanted to segment the population based on their abilities, right? For example, I don't know, there are a myriad of battery of tests out there. And you can, for example, measure the level of gross motor function. So you want to categorize children based on that. And then maybe you want to categorize children based on like communication abilities or cognitive abilities. But then when you, and let's say that you separate them. But then when you go to cerebral palsy, the child that has like mild communication abilities might have, severe motor disorders, and then you may find a child with, mild cognitive problems and very low motor disorders. So it's sort of, there are no relationships between like the different difficulties that these children may develop. So it's very, very difficult.
Yeah, but
and we didn't know that.
Do you think it's at all feasible to run controlled studies in this context?
Well, that's complicated actually. So I can show you. Oh, maybe can you mute? I'm hearing some echo. So I guess that it is extremely difficult and it's very debated. You can see yesterday I sent one study to my wife saying that about it was published in PubMed, claiming that that they were using an innovative cognitive stimulation strategy for children with cerebral palsy, and they proved this treatment with 15 children, right? Using psychometric tests, especially I think it was WISC-4 and another one that I don't remember now. And the conclusions were we found a cognitive stimulation treatment that improves the cognitive level of children with cerebral palsy. And I'm very skeptical about this result on the light of what I learned, right? And it's kind of almost outrageous that people publish these kind of things, because it's with 15 children with cerebral palsy, with all the variability of the population, it is very difficult to come up with these things. And And it has a second like implication, which is that if I had one of my childs with cerebral palsy, and if I read this, then I might feel like, well, maybe there's hope that this particular cognitive treatment will improve my child's cognitive development. And I don't know, there are ethical implications about this. But so to answer to your question, I think that it's debated. It's very debated. And my impression is that it really depends on the project, but most likely you will end up with a qualitative study, not a quantitative study. That's my impression.
Okay, so I don't want to use all the time. I just have two more questions. I hope won't take too long. The first is, so you already started investigating tangible interfaces for enabling the children to interact with the XO. Do you think that recent developments around, Fab Labs and all the work that's happening in the HCI community about new sorts of materials, being able to prototype new objects, is it something that you think would be useful to develop new ways to interact with XO-like computers? Because the things that you mentioned in the first study are relatively rudimentary in terms of sticking QR codes on sticks and stuff. So do you think there's an opportunity with these new ways of 3D printing, laser cutting stuff for a very low cost to try new things?
So I think that after the results with Make UI, which the characteristic of this user interface was that it was very, very flexible, and you could build almost anything. So I think that flexibility is the key. So if you find the user interface allowing, for example, in this case, the teachers or the director or the auxiliary staff to build by themselves their own tools, knowing the children, and also, for example, so I think that also allowing some of them, and this is very important. Imagine that you have user interfaces that allow some of the children to build their own gadgets and devices and all that. So and they know their limitations, so they might build something for them to access different user interfaces and computers. So I think that there's an opportunity there to keep exploring, right? Definitely.
Okay, so the last question. So you mentioned that models like BPMs were very little referred to or used in the HCI community, and yet in the HCI community, there's a significant body of work on dealing with disability. If you look at the CHI conference, for instance, you have a committee that deals now with health, accessibility, aging, all of this. So why do you think there is this gap between what's done on the, let's say, psychology side and the HCI community? Where do you think this comes from?
So basically, I start reading HCI literature on the topic back in 2011 and 2012, and on those years, I am talking about the main track, like CHI, for example, and proceedings of CHI. Of course, there are SIG Access and the other conferences with publications about. But if you go to the main track then at least, you know, on that period, you will find, and there are some books that are still, you know, like the Bible of human-computer interaction that are not updated in terms of like the discourse about disability. Of course, this might have changed over the years, and I made a prediction there that over time, you know, the discourse on talking about the biopsychosocial model will, you know, be more present in the literature. Maybe I need to catch up with that. But what I still read is that, like, if you go to the conferences related with the disability studies and other conferences with or other communities like anthropology and sociology, you will find a lot of works like criticizing the way technology practitioners deal with disability and how they perceive or how they think that disability should be solved. So it's more like, I think it's more like, okay, let's maybe we should, as HCI researchers, we should be warned about this. Maybe it's too strong to state, you know, that the HCI community is not aware of this. I don't think that. We should be aware that when we get started with any project, we could, of course, there are like things, there are priorities, and there are things that you need to tackle first. For example, if you have a child with very severe motor condition, or that life is in risk, standing up on a social view of disability, saying, okay, this might be a social construction, is not useful at all. I mean, it's more like harmful than useful for the person. So you need to start like probably from a medicalistic point of view, but then quickly you should expand your point of view and start. Once you solve the minor problems, then you may find that there are other issues that are also harmful. For example, stigmatization is one of the issues. Why I need, like, if I lack a limb, why do I need assistive technology, right? Why am I different than the others, right? I mean, it's something that could be debated, but I think that we as HCI researchers and practitioners should be aware that there are different discourses.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now Juan can continue with the questions.
Okay.
Let's
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Es tarde. So first I want to reiterate what Manuel said earlier. I think the work far exceeds what I have seen in other situations for a master's degree. So the amount of work that was done is quite significant compared to what we expect here in the U.S. and I think what I have seen in other countries too. So I think that's something where congratulations to Gustavo for getting all this work done. A couple of other comments on some of the things that you mentioned. I think you do have a good sense on the lack of validity and reliability of psychometric tests for this population. I think it's not that it's useless, but it's something you should take with a grain of salt. And it's very likely that in many cases, it's not providing any kind of accurate measurement, especially for children with more severe motor impairments. And even in some cases, there might be sensory problems too. So they may not be able to hear as well or see as well. And that could also have a significant impact on those scores. I would say a little comment that might explain a little bit the use of certain vocabulary or approaches in HCI with respect to disabilities. I think that's might be something local to the United States. It's a lot easier for academics here to get funding from the health research agencies that focus on a medical approach to problems than from the science agency, the National Science Foundation. So that means that some of, at least a good chunk of the research that's been related to disabilities goes through the health agencies. And sometimes in order to get the funding, people use the language of the medical community, and that might be reflected to some degree in what you see in the HCI literature. I think it has changed a lot in the last few years, though. So I think the trend that you predicted has been occurring, obviously starting more in the accessibility community within HCI, but it's also moving elsewhere as well. My first question is about the two axes that you had. So you had the cognitive and the motor abilities. Did you do any kind of assessment of sensory abilities? So hearing, vision, etc.
So the answer is mostly no, but those, like most of the children in S1, so the green area, didn't like. I mean, so you have variability, right? So you could see. So the answer is no, but you would see like children with visual difficulties, and you, so in order to overcome that, you need to build a user interface. If it uses the screen, you need to build one that has, for example, a good contrast between foreground and background. But beyond that point, the main goal was to sort of create a perceptual user interface with multi-channel outputs. So the idea was, and that was something that we tried to achieve with the storytelling. So it was more like a universal approach in terms that we wanted to like reinforce background and foreground, the subtitles. So for deaf users to be able to read what the characters were saying, for like blind users to be able to hear what they were saying. So the idea was to like provide sensory output to different sensory channels of the body. So we didn't do that because of the variability of the population, and we had a lot of different deficits there. So we wanted to build user interfaces with all the multi-channel outputs. Why is that? Why is your question? In terms of maybe could have improved something or segmented the population in a different way?
Mainly just wondering whether it might have been something else to consider in explaining the different outcomes that you got. Oops. Pardon. Okay, now you can hear me. So mainly the question was in terms of that it might have explained a little bit better some of the different outcomes that you got from different children.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
as a main reason.
But
okay, but it sounds like you did have the the multimodal or multi-channel approach is the right approach if you have if you have that challenge.
It could have been. I mean, in terms of the action research, like reflection and all that, having that information may have been useful, and we may have like detected things that we didn't detect before because of this lack of information. And another thing that we lacked of was medical like diagnostics of each child, and that was like we had some of them, but we weren't sure if we could use them because of ethical implications and all that, and we weren't authorized to use them by the ethics committee here. So in order to, the ideal scenario would be, to go to School 2000 with an extended like interdisciplinary team, including doctors and other actors there, to kind of come up with a diagnostic, right? And actually, that's something that the teachers working there maybe benefit from. So maybe that's another thing that with enough funding and all that, it could be done. Like having a better approach on the etiology and the deficit that each child had.
Okay. Next question is this is a really simple one. Do you have video recordings of the sessions?
Yes. Yeah. Do you want to see some of them?
So I think we were having the conversation earlier with Emmanuel about the challenges in running controlled experiments with this population. And I think an alternative that you see a lot in research similar to yours in the CHI community and in the HCI community is that people will do more qualitative reports on projects like this one, where what you do is you analyze the video, you come up with codes for things that happened, and in that way you can provide a very rich understanding of what happened, and it can be a way of communicating the work. So that could be something if you wanted to move this forward and thinking about publishing some of this, although it has been a few years since you did it, so that's a bit of a challenge because some technologies have changed, but that could be a route. You have done plenty of work, enough for the masters, but if you wanted to do more for another purpose, then I think that could be a route that's available because you have those videos. Yes,
and we use video in some of the sessions. There are some concerns with video recordings because you need like approval from the parents if you want to share them. So we tried not to video record like their faces in some cases, but what we really did was we tried to triangulate notes. For example, 3 people taking notes independently, and then during the lab sessions, sharing those notes and coming up with conclusions about and observations about the population. And some of them, were the ones that were in agreement were debated and so it was really a sort of I would say ethnographic approach in some cases, especially during the first stage of Nexo. But I agree that having those videos might be in the future.
Yeah. I think it could be someone else's master's degree to analyze the videos. Maybe not INCO, but somewhere else. But yeah, but I think it's an opportunity for some additional work there. So you talked a little bit about if ideally you could come in with an interdisciplinary team, it would include this kind of professionals and this other kind of professionals. Can you tell me a little bit more about your thoughts on interdisciplinary teams in approaching this kind of challenges and providing access to computing to children?
Sure. So the first thing that comes to my mind is that it's challenging. Because, for example, if an engineer sees a chair without a leg, right? They will go and try to fix the leg. You know, yeah, it can be fixed, right? And if a psychologist, I hope there are no psychologists here, sees a chair without a leg, they will start reflecting about, you know, why it lacks of a leg, you know. Maybe there's a social construction behind this, and maybe we should put, I don't know. So it's difficult to make the, and even, I mean, for example, it happens when you are talking to engineers and psychologists. Psychologists are like more empathetic. Like you are saying something funny and they will laugh. You know, and engineers are like more like processing. You know, so you need to kind of, it's also difficult to blend them together and you know, try them to work together. So, for example, at the beginning in Nexus stage 1, we wanted to, so we divided the teams, and each team had I think like 3 engineers and 1 psychologist. And the idea was, you know, to have each team like working together for a long time. And what it happened was that, for example, at the beginning, the psychologists were like the protagonists of, you know, the work, leading like decisions and analyzing the children and the context and giving feedback to the engineers. And after that, once the engineers like had enough like information, they would start losing protagonism, and the engineers starts, you know, working and providing solutions, and then the psychologists, the participation was like more intermittent. Like, for example, helping engineers in the field to run, you know, user testing sessions, for example. So that caused some difficulties, even emotional ones, you know, with the teams. Like, I'm not important now. What's going on? So we tried, and I didn't put that on the thesis because that would have been too much. But in Nexus stage 2, what we did was separate the teams a little bit, and so the psychologists basically stayed most of the time in the field, working with the children and like trying to sort of improve the social link, right, with them and the teachers and all that, paving the way for the engineers to come and be accepted by the children and to gain confidence and all that. So and trustfulness. So it is difficult. I don't know if it has been analyzed in the past, but maybe it deserves another thesis, master thesis research, to see the differences and how this work can be improved.
Yeah, I think it's a common challenge. I think one of the foundational difficulties is when professionals are being trained, they usually only collaborate with people in their own field. That's changing in a lot of other places. So nowadays, and you come to a lot of programs that do human-computer interaction, and you do have people with an engineering background or a psychology background or a design background. They're all working together throughout, so it's nothing alien to them to work with people from a different field. But I think if you have situations where people have only worked with folks in their own field, then it gets a lot more challenging. Usually it takes actually someone like you who can bridge different disciplines to lead those teams for them to be successful. But it is a challenge.
And I think that human-computer interaction might be this discipline, like articulating between the other ones. Because they know a little bit of cognitive psychology, they know a little bit of software engineering, a little bit of sociology. So I think it's the discipline to find people, that are able to articulate these things.
Yes, we are the glue. Yes,
we are the glue.
So. One last question. This one's maybe it's a little too hard, or maybe it's not the right question to ask, but I'll ask it anyway. So, what do you think projects like Plan Ceibal or other similar initiatives that aim to provide computing to all children in schools, what should their approach be to be more inclusive? What kinds of programs should they develop? What kinds of tools should they have available for teachers? What should they be doing to be more inclusive?
Okay, so first off, I don't know if the first step towards improving social inclusion is technology. Right? So I think it's more political. I think that one of the things that the World Health Organization encourages is to promote social inclusion of children with disabilities within their own communities, like their own neighborhoods, including them in schools for children with typical developments. And of course, that's not easy, and that requires money and budget from governments, because they need to, for example, build ramps in the schools, and also train teachers in order to be able to work with children in these situations. Maybe they need some more auxiliaries and all that. So if you really, really want social inclusion, then you really need to change the way that governments are acting about this. I don't feel like technology will solve the problems. Once we solve, this social thing, then technology there might be a solution. But at least, I guess, and that happened with Plan Ceibal, and it's still, I guess, happening, is that if you deliver computers to all public schools in Uruguay, and one of those schools is School 2000, that school, it's out. It's really, really outstanding that the children will not be able to use the computers. Then you need someone in the government to kind of realize this and do something about this. So here in Uruguay, you have Pronadis, which is Programa para la Discapacidad, or something like that. It's like an agency for disability, which is really bad funded, and they lack of money, and so I wouldn't expect a lot from the government to overcome this situation. But I think that more money should be invested, in these kind of things. And there's one thing that it's important to mention. Like, have you heard of OXO, a company, an American company? They have a line of products called good grips, which are like products for the kitchen, like to peel apples and things like that, apple peelers. So what they do is, so they have these good grips are like products that are very, very easy to handle. They have very, very good user interface. Where and you have, for example, a potato peeler where with one movement you can like peel the potato. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's something like that. And what they do is they use users with arthrosis as part of the design process. So, and the goal is the end users are really users with arthrosis, but due to the fact that these users can use these tools, then other users can benefit from that. So I think that including users with disabilities in the design process may be beneficial for the whole society. And here in Montevideo, for example, like very recently, it's very slowly becoming an accessible city with ramps like on each corner. That's something very recent. But let's say that, for example, I don't know, 40 years ago or 50 years ago, a politician in the municipal government with in charge of, for example, designing the city. Let's say that this person had a wheelchair, then he might have decided to build ramps on each corner, and then we would have had a city enabled for people with wheelchairs, but other users can benefit from that. For example, I have two little children, and using the stroller in Montevideo is almost impossible, right? And if I had like ramps in each corner, then it would be more simple for me. And that's something that is very rare here to find ramps everywhere. So I mean, there's something else. If you always have a benefit when you add. Of course, it's more expensive maybe, in the short term, but in the long term, I think we could all benefit from including people with disabilities in the design process. And this could be enforced by law, right? This could be you cannot build the technology without including I don't know, users with Down syndrome or wheelchairs or whatever. I don't know, an idea, wild idea.
Okay, hold on for a moment.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I read your this work.
Thank you.
It's something incredible. I mean, it's not the thesis. The topic is not usually neurowide. HCI, I think that perhaps the second, well, first, the third, yeah, the third thesis in neurowide in the topic. And I think that this kind of work is something that change your mind a lot. I think you change a lot doing this work, doing Mexo.
Personally, yeah.
Yeah, personally. Mm-hmm. So I think that the work is very good. I have some few questions because all the questions that I had
were answered.
Yeah, were already answered. The first question is which kind of recommendation you will give to the community of HCI community when that is now doing some homepage or some site for I don't know for some minister or some government agency, and perhaps it's not thinking in disabilities, and that is thinking in the middleman, as you say. But when reading your thesis, you say that 16% of the people have some kind of disability in Uruguay. And from this percentage, 5% are severely disabled, or the kids at least. So I don't know, what do you think, what kind of recommendations you will give to the community of people that is trying to design interface or something?
So if we constrain to government agencies, like building solutions for citizens, then I would recommend, as what I said, including users with disabilities in the design process. Don't use middlemen, don't use intermediaries of any kind. First off, use a user-centered design approach. If you are building a web page for, I don't know, paying something or whatever, you know, some especially if it's a governmental thing, I would recommend including people with disabilities in the process.
Yeah, but when you include people with disability, the question of Juan and Manuel, they say that okay, you have to discriminate because the disability is there are many kinds of disabilities, and perhaps you kill the middleman, but you create the middle disabled man, trying to solve considering all the problems.
I agree, but at least I think it's more inclusive. I mean, first off, I don't think that maybe I'm wrong, but I'm skeptical about thinking that like governmental pages and other like government services are using a user-centered approach or using user experience or whatever. Of course, they might be hiring UX experts, but I don't know if they are like using users. I know that in Chile, for example, which has an agency like the HCI, which is the Uruguayan agency for improving electronic government. The person in charge of it is an HCI guy. So he was trying to enforce this kind of things when building websites and all that. I don't know. I lack information to say something about things in Uruguay. But let's say that they had this, then I would incorporate a blind person in the development process, at least, maybe a person with Down syndrome, and then start growing, maybe. I don't know. I don't have the right answer to that, because I agree with you. I mean, given that our society, if we take for granted the structure of our society and that we live in a capitalist society and all that, and we have a democratic government and all that, and yada yada, then this will be maybe the best solution, to start including people. Maybe with another society, then you don't need that. But
okay. Let me see. In your thesis, what you work about for one side of talking about assistive technologies and another side talking about universal design. Which is the best of both worlds, or how to combine? What is your idea about how to combine both worlds to when you are leaving the middleman and going to the extreme of the house?
Okay, so assistive technology is about using technology to bridge the gap between the accessibility gap, right? So you are giving the user, for example, a prosthetic limb or something, to allow the user to use the computer, for example, or use any product, right? And that's great. And in many cases, this is useful for the user, and that's the way to go. Especially, for example, with users that have, I don't know, for example, strong communication issues that cannot express their feelings and talk with others and all that. So assistive technology is not good or bad. I mean, and I think you shouldn't put things in this dilemma if it's a good thing or a bad thing at all. So it's useful, right? In certain cases. In other cases, it is claimed that assistive technology, for some cases, can be stigmatizing, right? For example, if, I don't know, I have an elevator and a short person, and I cannot reach the buttons, there are two approaches there. One approach is to have a bench inside the elevator, and this is like, oh, I'm different, so I need to climb the bench in order to press the buttons, right? And that can be stigmatizing. That's a symbol, right, coming from the user interface. That's a symbol of stigmatization. But if you just lower the buttons to height, which is reachable by everyone, then you wouldn't feel like different. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's I can use the interface without any aid. So it's like you need to find the right trade-off.
Okay. Well, I think that's all. The other question was already answered. I talked with you yesterday, trying to understand many things. Okay. I think it's all. Okay. Now, bueno, ahora terminó la parte de preguntas. La idea es que el tribunal se reúna y están invitados a salir junto con el tesista.
Capaz que apago esto. Thank you very much. Let me post this.
Hi everybody, now we are going to discuss the rank. Ya saludando.
Javier, ¿no?
La cámara es aquella, ¿no?